Picking up where I left off, in Kalamazoo, the parking system received awards from the International Parking Institute, its predecessor actually, and from the International Downtown Association as the most customer-friendly parking system in the country, and that was a goal that we set and achieved. And we were very happy about that, and that in fact led me into becoming a kind of a parking consultant and working on a number of parking projects all around the country. The other thing that we did, Arcadia Creek really rebuilt the north half of downtown Kalamazoo, and finally we set in motion a process for redesigning and rebuilding the Kalamazoo Mall, which took place after I left. So Kalamazoo, from a professional point of view, was extremely important, and it led to my next job in Detroit. But the other thing that happened was that, as I mentioned, Rita became pregnant before we got to Kalamazoo, and I can vividly remember the doctor instructing me to what to look for as we approached the proposed date when our baby John was going to be born. And Rita woke me up and she was having pains, and so I was instructed to give her a glass of water and have her lay on her left side. I think it was her left side. And she said, I don't think we've got time, let's head to the hospital. So she asked me to get her a pair of shoes, and I went in the closet, and the first pair of shoes that I came up with were a set of black patent leather dress shoes with gold buckles on them. And she was not too happy with that selection, but she put her shoes on. We got to the hospital on time, and they barely got her onto a gurney. They didn't even get her onto the regular table for delivery, and John was born 7/07 on January 5th, 1990. It was a great joy for both of us, and we believe to this day he was the cutest kid in the room where they had all the newborns. In fact, there was a woman who had a baby next to John, and she thought John was her baby, and she was wanting very badly to take him home because she thought he was so cute. Having John around the house as a newborn was amazingly joy-producing for both of us. We were so happy. He was such a great little kid. He used to come in and watch me shave in the morning, and we loved taking him for walks on the Kalamazoo Mall and to Bronson Park, and Rita would take him to the child care center called the CDC at Borges Medical Center where she worked, and people would come by just to say hello to him, and he started making friends there. It was all in all a wonderful time, and we enjoyed very much being new parents, and we found John to be just a sheer delight, as he is to this day. So as time went on, as a couple of years rolled by, Kalamazoo continued to develop, and good things were happening there, and then I was getting a little eager to move on, partly because I think my board leadership had changed. Clayton was no longer chair of the board, and the person that came in as board chair was more of a micromanager, and so I had an opportunity at the time to go to New Haven, Connecticut. I was being recruited to head the Yale New Haven Initiative, which would have put me on the staff of Yale University. That was pretty exciting, but it was an opportunity that wasn't going to present itself for probably 6 months. And in the interim, Rich Bradley, who is head of the International Downtown Association, had put me in touch with a fellow named Bruce Alexander at Yale University, and so that looked like a pretty sure bet if we could get the money in place and negotiate a contract. But Rich was also pushing me to consider going to Detroit. Turned out that a friend of his had taken the job as head of Detroit Renaissance, the CEO organization there, and was trying to recruit me to come and create a new downtown organization. So after a couple of conversations and a meeting with Bob Keller, who is the new director of Detroit Renaissance, it looked like a very interesting possibility. However, I also had an unexpected call from Sharon Sales Belton, who was the new mayor of Minneapolis and an old friend of mine from the Model City days, and she wanted me to come back to Minneapolis and head the Minneapolis Community Development Agency under her new administration. She'd just been elected mayor. And then at the same time, I was being asked to come and talk with the people that were organizing the new downtown partnership in Pittsburgh. And I probably would have taken the Pittsburgh job. I had a lot of friends there, and I was eager to see what could be done in downtown Pittsburgh. But I had committed to Sharon that I would come and talk with her, and as it turned out, I actually flew up and had interviews with all of the city council members, and I was well on the way to taking the job in Minneapolis after the job in Pittsburgh sort of fell through. And as it turned out, there were delays in Minneapolis, and Detroit kept upping the ante and offering me a better deal and a better deal, and finally I felt I couldn't wait any longer, so I agreed to accept the offer from Detroit, and Rita and I moved to Detroit in the summer of 1994. That was a great challenge. Detroit was in terrible shape. It had been virtually run into the ground through many factors, but one of the worst was the corruption and ineptitude of Mayor Coleman Young, who was still mayor, but up until just before I got there, but a new mayor had been elected, and he was one of the main reasons why I agreed to come. Dennis Archer was just the opposite of Coleman Young. Smart, honest, energetic, young. I liked him very much, and I thought we could get a lot done, and in fact we did. And to make the Detroit story kind of short, I was asked to create a new downtown organization, a merger or at least an alliance of the existing downtown organizations in the new center, in the Central Business District, in the Midtown Arts District, and in the Riverfront District. And that came about, and then I was also asked to undertake a land assembly project of about 16 acres centered on the J.L. Hudson's department store on Woodward Avenue in the heart of downtown. And Jim Turvo, the mayor's top aide, and I figured out a way to get corporate support, $250,000 each from each of a number of the major corporations, including the 3 autos, a couple of banks, and the utilities. And we used that money to get options and purchase agreements on property within this 16-acre site around the Campus Martius park proposed on Woodward Avenue. And that became the site of CompuWare and the site of Quicken Loan, and really the genesis of the renaissance of downtown Detroit. It took many years of work and great leadership by a number of people, but downtown Detroit today is really a remarkable success story, as is downtown Kalamazoo. So that was a 2-year project. It was a lot of fun doing that, and I met some really interesting people along the line. like Pittsburgh, the Detroit Renaissance Organization was a CEO organization, so I met and worked with the CEOs of the automobile companies, banks, real estate companies, and utilities and other major firms. The owner of the Detroit Tigers and the Red Wings, and Roger Penske, who is well known for his trucking interests and racing interests. And but after 2 years and Rita continuing her college education at William Tyndale, and John doing well in preschool, I received a recruiting call from Des Moines, Iowa, and this was at a time when I was getting kind of fed up with the racial situation in Detroit, which was not very positive. And so I agreed to fly out and take a look at Des Moines. It was also at a time that my dad had just died, and I was hoping to be able to get closer to Minneapolis, if not in Minneapolis. And here was an opportunity to be just a 3-hour car drive away rather than a plane flight, which was a situation from Detroit. So I flew in and I met some of the board leaders of the new Des Moines downtown organization, and was just very, very impressed with people like Dave Hurd, Fred Weitz, Connie Weimer, Mark Feldman, John Ruan, and others. And it seemed like a great opportunity, and Rita was willing to make the move. So we moved to Des Moines in the summer of 1996, bought a house on the south side, and Rita enrolled in school at Simpson College, where she finally got her BA degree, and she got a job at Iowa Health Systems. The opportunity again in Des Moines was nothing short of incredible. There were big plans that were being formed, and we had the opportunity to do some terrific things through something called the Major Projects Task Force. We also had an opportunity to stop the construction of a freeway project around the southern edge of downtown, which became Martin Luther King Parkway, and that is a story unto itself. The city manager at the time, Eric Anderson, said he thought even with the Major Project Task Force and all the projects that we did through that the Martin Luther King Parkway project was the most significant thing that happened during my tenure as downtown president there. Des Moines was a wonderful place to live. People were friendly, had the best farmers market in the country, which we ran, and a great leadership on the part of the downtown organization. Unfortunately, what happened is a small group of people were opposed to the leadership of the Des Moines Development Corporation, which was the parent organization for the downtown organization, and they executed a coup and threw out the two guys that I mentioned, Dave Hurd and Fred Weitz, and brought in new leadership that was interested more in a Chamber of Commerce approach to development in Des Moines. To be fair, they were able to amass a large war chest, and they were able to undertake some major projects that we wanted to have happen. And I need to give them credit for what they were able to accomplish. But it probably could have been done in a different way and without the kind of coup that they executed, and with what I consider the disrespect of Fred and Dave, who are two of the best people that I've met in my work as downtown. So Des Moines was a big success career-wise, but I was ready to leave when my organization was under the threat of being taken over by this bigger Chamber of Commerce organization. And it was at that time that I had been elected board chair of the International Downtown Association. I'd been on the board for a number of years, and I'd held most of the officers' position, I think all of the officers' position. And in Los Angeles in 2000, it was my turn to be chair. So it was at that meeting that Betsy Jackson, our current president at that time, let me know that she wanted to resign and start her own consulting business. So I set up a search committee, and we began a search which culminated in the winter and spring of 2001. I think it was actually the fall of 2001. We met in Washington, D.C. at the Downtown D.C. bid office, and we interviewed 3 candidates for the job, all of whom had good credentials and were well liked by people, but the search committee couldn't settle on any of them, and so one of the board members, Kathy Coleman, suggested I step outside the room, as she said she wanted to talk about me behind my back. So I stepped across the hall and I called Rita and said, "Rita, here's what just happened, and I think they're either going to ask me to resign as board chair, or they're going to asked me to take the job as IDA president." And when I came back in, they indeed offered me the job as president, and I said I'd only take it if there was unanimous support from the board, because I didn't want to make this feel like it was some kind of a setup. Kate Jonkus agreed as a vice chair to call all board members, and she got 100% support. So I signed on as the new president of the International Downtown Association, and began moving to Washington, D.C., which is something I'd always dreamed about doing, but I never thought was going to happen. I actually started work with Betsy, staying on part-time. My first day was April 1st, 2001, April Fool's Day, if you will, and my official date as full-time president was tax day, April 15th, 2001. And we had wonderful years, especially the early years. The first year also happened to coincide with the attack on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon on September 11th, 2001. So we had our annual conference scheduled for Pittsburgh in September of 2001. I think it was the 25th. And we were worried that we were going to have to cancel because we thought nobody would fly or would be able to fly to Pittsburgh. But it turned out that the flight restrictions were lifted, and we had very good attendance at the Pittsburgh 2001 annual conference, which was a major victory for us. And then the succession of conferences after that in places like Boston. Boston was a record-setting conference. Cleveland did well, even though it was in Cleveland, and it was not viewed as a very attractive site. And then Vancouver in 2004 was our 50th anniversary. We had a big celebration, record attendance there. And then finally in 2007 we had the World Congress in New York, and that also had record attendance. So we were having great participation, great attendance. Financially, we were doing okay, and we were working on a new book on managing downtowns. Just a whole lot of good things were happening at IDA, but I was experiencing some health problems at the time. I found out that I had sleep apnea, and Rita was having some problems too. She had a parasite infection in her left leg, and she was having seizures as a result of that, so I wasn't getting any sleep. I was just really getting exhausted. And so in 2009, I met with the executive committee and told them that I wanted to resign or retire, which I did. And that would give me an opportunity to stay home and spend more time with Rita and look after her and also deal with my own health issues. And I started my own consulting corporation called Civitas Consultants, which over the next 7 years has proven to be a very worthwhile and enjoyable endeavor, and has allowed me to work with probably between 50 and 100 different cities. So I'm still doing a little bit of active consulting, working in Columbia, Maryland, in San Antonio, Texas, and in Moorhead, Minnesota on projects, as well as one in Pittsburgh that just wrapped up. And I hope to, after I recover from this surgery, I hope to be able to continue to do some consulting work, although I don't envision myself doing that on a full-time basis. So at this point, I'm going to wrap up this chapter. That brings us up to the current date, and the next chapter I'm going to talk about some interesting people I've met along the way.